Meat. It's on just about every kind of plate all over the world, from sizzling steaks to savory stews. But have you ever really stopped to think about the sheer scale of our global appetite? We're going to dive in and explore just how much meat we're eating, who's eating the most, and whether our collective hunger for it is maybe, just maybe, starting to change. To really wrap your head around the scale, let's just start with one number: 9. According to our World in Data, for every single person on this planet, 9 chickens are slaughtered every year. That is a staggering figure, and it really shows you just how central meat has become to our entire global food system. So this massive level of consumption, it really brings up a critical question. As populations grow and economies shift, is our appetite for meat just going to keep climbing forever, or are we maybe on the verge of a really big shift in our global diet? Well, according to a recent outlook from the Food and Agriculture Organization, things are changing. Now, don't get me wrong, we're still eating a ton of meat, but the growth in our appetite, that's slowing way down. We really do seem to be hitting some kind of turning point, but to see where we're going, we first need to understand exactly where we are right now. So who are the current champions of consumption? Which countries are the world's biggest meat eaters? Well, as it turns out, the answer totally depends on what kind of meat you're talking about. When it comes to beef and veal, Argentina is just in a league of its own. The average Argentinian eats over 51 kilograms, that's more than 112 pounds every single year. For them, it is so much more than just food. It's a core part of their national culture. But okay, let's switch gears. If we go from beef to mutton and goat, a totally different champion emerges: Mongolia. Here, the average person eats nearly 50 kilograms a year. That's a diet that was really born from a traditional nomadic lifestyle, perfectly adapted to a pretty harsh environment. So as you can see right here, being the top meat eater isn't so simple. Argentina takes the crown for beef and for red meat overall, but Mongolia completely dominates in mutton. It paints a really clear picture: different countries, different tastes, and different leaders in consumption. So this all begs the question, right? Why? What's driving these massive differences in consumption from one place to another? What are the key things that shape what ends up on our plates? While there are a lot of complex factors, research from Our World in Data points to one surprisingly simple and powerful indicator that almost always predicts a nation's appetite for meat. And that indicator is wealth. The data shows this strong, clear, positive relationship. As a country's GDP per person goes up, so does its meat consumption. Generally speaking, as people get richer, they tend to branch out their diets, moving away from simple staples and adding more meat. And this is where wealth really translates into these deeply ingrained cultural habits. In South America, it fuels grilling traditions like the famous asado. In North America, it's the foundation of a fast food culture built on burgers and hot dogs. And in places like Australia and Kazakhstan, that high consumption is tied directly to their agricultural landscape and their national identity. But here's the thing. These habits aren't set in stone. Like we saw at the beginning, that growth rate is slowing down. And that's because consumer behavior is going through a really subtle but important shift. The FAO report highlights a key change. In the past, rising incomes just meant more meat. Simple as that. It was all about quantity. Today, that trend is splitting. While a lot of consumers are being forced to look for cheaper cuts, people with higher incomes are actually starting to prioritize quality over quantity. So, what's behind this shift? Well, on one hand, you've got economic pressure. Inflation and higher meat prices are squeezing household budgets, and that's pushing many people towards more affordable proteins. But on the other hand, you've got a change in values. A growing number of people are making a conscious choice to eat less meat, but they demand better quality, and that's often driven by health and lifestyle preferences. And that brings us to one of the biggest factors shaping the future of meat: our health. So let's take a look at what the large-scale epidemiological studies have to say about the risks. Okay, first, a quick but really crucial definition from the International Agency for Research on Cancer. Red meat is just unprocessed muscle meat, like a steak or a pork chop. Processed meat is anything that's been salted, cured, or smoked. Think bacon, sausage, or cold cuts. This distinction is absolutely key. All right, take a look at this chart. Now, don't worry about all the numbers, just look at the direction of the line. As you move from left to right, which means more servings of red meat per day, you can see that line for the hazard ratio, which is just a measure of risk, is steadily climbing. In plain English, for both men and women in these huge studies, Eating more red meat was linked to a higher risk of death from all causes. Now let's focus specifically on the risk of death from cardiovascular disease. Again, notice the trend lines. As consumption goes up, so does the risk. But look a little closer at the two different lines. The dotted one, for processed meat, climbs even more steeply than the solid line for unprocessed red meat. This suggests an even stronger link to heart-related problems. And we see a similar story with type 2 diabetes. Look at the first two charts for red and processed meat. The risk line goes up. But now, check out the third chart on the right for poultry or white meat. That risk line, it stays flat. The big takeaway here is that while red and processed meats were linked to higher diabetes risk, poultry just wasn't. So the conclusion from this huge body of scientific evidence is pretty stark and direct. As the review puts it, long-term high consumption of red meat, and especially processed meat, is linked to an increased risk of mortality and some major diseases. So, after looking at the skull, the drivers, the trends, and now the health risks, what does all of this mean for the future of meat on our plates? It's pretty clear our relationship with meat is at a major crossroads. It's a complicated story, isn't it? It's shaped by wealth, it's defined by cultural traditions, it's being squeezed by the cost of living, and more, it's being informed by a growing awareness of the long-term health implications. And this is where the global picture comes right back to you. The data shows us the trends, the drivers, and the risks. The only real question left is how each of us is going to respond. So knowing all this, what does a future of your plate look like?